Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. It's the year 170 AD. The most powerful man on earth is sitting alone in a tent on the frozen banks of the Danube River. Outside, a brutal war rages. His empire is crumbling. Plague has killed millions. His own trusted generals have betrayed him. And yet, this man is not shouting. He is not throwing things across the room. He is not spiraling into rage or panic or despair. He is writing, quietly, peacefully. In a private journal he never intended anyone to read, he's writing about his anger, about how to master it, about why losing your temper is the single greatest mistake any powerful person can make. That man was Marcus Aurelius,
Roman emperor, commander of the greatest army in history, the richest, most powerful, most feared man alive. And yet, by every account of those who knew him, he was the calmest person in any room he ever entered. So here's the question that's haunted historians, philosophers, and psychologists for centuries. How? How did a man who held the weight of the world on his shoulders manage to never lose control? Today, we're going to answer that completely. And more importantly, we're going to show you how his exact techniques can work for you. Not in theory, not in some abstract mindfulness way, but practically in your daily life. The next time someone cuts you off in traffic, or your boss embarrasses you in a meeting, or the world just refuses to go your way. Let's begin.
Before we get into the actual secrets, you need to understand something important. Marcus Aurelius had every reason in the world to be angry. Think about the circumstances of his life. He became emperor at age 40, not because he wanted it, but because the previous emperor essentially pointed at him and said, "You. It's you." He spent most of his reign not in the luxury of Rome, but on muddy, frozen war frontiers. He watched a plague sweep through his empire and kill an estimated 5 million people. He lost multiple children. His wife was rumored to be unfaithful. His co-emperor, Lucius Verus, his own adoptive brother, was reckless and dissolute. His son, Commodus, who would inherit the empire, turned out to be exactly the kind of narcissistic, uncontrollable ruler Marcus had spent his whole life trying not to be. And yet, the Meditations, his private journal, never meant for public eyes, discovered centuries after his death, reveals a man in constant, disciplined practice.
A man who woke up each morning and chose not to be controlled by anger. Here's what makes Marcus Aurelius so uniquely powerful as a figure. He wasn't a monk. He wasn't retreating from the world. He was in the arena every single day, dealing with betrayal, incompetence, loss, and pressure most of us will never come close to experiencing. And his philosophy wasn't passive. It was an active, daily practice, a muscle he trained relentlessly. He wrote in his journal, and here's a paraphrase worth remembering, that when you wake up, expect the world to be difficult. Expect people to be petty, ungrateful, and frustrating. And decide in advance how you'll respond. That's not cynicism.
That's mastery. To understand how Marcus controlled his anger, we first need to understand what Stoics believed anger actually was, because their answer might surprise you. We tend to think of anger as a feeling, something that just happens to us, something that rises up involuntarily, like a wave. The ancient Stoics completely disagreed. They believed anger is a choice. More specifically, they believed anger is a judgment, a decision made incredibly fast that something should not have happened the way it did. Let that sink in. You don't get angry because something bad happened. You get angry because you judged that it was wrong, that it violated your expectations of how the world should work. Marcus Aurelius goes even further in the Meditations. He describes anger as temporary madness. He's not being dramatic. Neurologically, he's actually quite accurate. Modern brain science shows that in moments of intense anger, the prefrontal cortex, your rational thinking brain, quite literally goes offline. You're operating on pure amygdala response, fight mode. And here's what Marcus found so philosophically absurd about anger. It assumes you were owed something different. It assumes the universe made a mistake. Someone was rude to you, but why did you believe they owed you courtesy? Your flight got canceled, but who promised you smooth travel? Your plan fell apart, but who guaranteed it would work? None of these are moral failures of the universe. They are simply events, neutral events to which you attached an expectation. And the moment that expectation wasn't met, you called it an injustice. This is the first great Stoic insight into anger. It is not caused by events. It is caused by the story you tell yourself about events. Change the story, change the anger. Now we're getting into the practical tools. And this first one is so simple, it almost seems too obvious. But Marcus Aurelius returned to it again and again and again in his journal, because he knew how easy it is to forget in the heat of the moment. He called it, in essence, the pause. In the Meditations, he writes about the space that exists between a stimulus and a response. Someone says something cruel to you. Someone makes a decision that affects your life. Something goes wrong. In that microsecond, that tiny window between what happened and what you do next, that is where your entire character lives. Marcus Aurelius was obsessed with this pause. He trained himself to extend it, to breathe into it, to refuse to let impulse collapse it. He wrote about how the wise person does not react, they respond. React, and you're an animal. Respond, and you're a human being, exercising the only freedom that can never be taken from you. Viktor Frankl, writing from a Nazi concentration camp 1,800 years after Marcus, famously echoed this exact idea. Between stimulus and response, he wrote, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. But here's where Marcus gets specifically practical. Because the Stoics didn't believe you could just will yourself to pause. They believed you had to preload the pause with something. A phrase, a mental image, a specific thought you'd already rehearsed. Marcus had several. The one he returned to most often was this. This is what men are like. This is simply what happens. Not acceptance as defeat, acceptance as clarity. The event happened. Now what?
Here's a technique from the Meditations that is almost shockingly visual, and once you've understood it, you'll never be able to unsee it when you're upset. Marcus Aurelius called it the view from above. The idea is this. When something makes you furious, someone's behavior, a setback, a conflict, you deliberately pull your perspective backwards, like a camera zooming out. First, you see the room you're in, then the building, then the city, then the country, then the entire planet spinning in the darkness of space. A pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan would later put it. And then Marcus asks you to hold that image and ask yourself, in the context of all of this, what is the thing that just made me angry? Now, some people hear this and think it's about dismissing your problems, making them seem small so you can ignore them. That's not it at all. Marcus wasn't trying to invalidate pain. He was trying to interrupt the cognitive trap that anger creates, where the thing that upset you fills your entire mental screen.
Where it becomes everything. Where your mind convinces you that this moment is the most important thing that has ever happened. The view from above doesn't make your problems smaller. It makes you bigger. It gives you room to breathe, room to think, room to act with intention instead of reaction. Marcus also applied this historically. He would think about the great men who'd lived before him. Caesar, Alexander, Socrates, and ask, where are their rages now? Where is their anger? Dust. Their petty frustrations, their moments of pride and fury, gone. And so will yours be. Not as nihilism, but as liberation. This too shall pass. And once you know that, what are you afraid to handle calmly?
If there is one single idea at the absolute heart of Stoic philosophy, one concept that Marcus Aurelius returned to more than any other, it is this: some things are in your control, and most things are not. This sounds simple, but living it is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Here's how Marcus framed it in the Meditations. You control your thoughts, your judgments, your intentions, your effort, and your character. You do not control the weather, other people, the past, your reputation, outcomes, or the universe itself. The tragedy of most human anger? We spend our energy raging at the second column. Things that were never ours to control in the first place. Someone was rude to you? You cannot control their character. A project failed. You cannot control every variable. A person you love is making choices you hate. You cannot control their free will. What can you control? How you treat that person anyway. How you adapt to the failed project. How you communicate your values to someone you love. And then release the outcome. Marcus wrote about this relentlessly because he, of all people, faced the constant temptation to believe he could control everything. He was the emperor.
He had armies. He had the law. He had absolute power, in theory. And yet he understood better than anyone that power over external things is an illusion. The only real empire you ever rule is your own mind. When you feel anger rising, ask yourself honestly,
Is this about something I can change? If yes, act. If no, release. Not suppress, not ignore. Release. Let it move through you and out. You were never meant to carry what was never yours. This next technique from Marcus Aurelius is the one most people find hardest to accept because it asks something that feels almost counterintuitive. It asks you to love the people who make you angry. Not in a sentimental, passive way. In a deeply philosophical, practical way. Here's how Marcus put it in the Meditations, paraphrased. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, today I will meet people who are petty, ungrateful, rude, dishonest, jealous, and cruel. But I will not be harmed by them because I understand why they are that way. This is not naive. It's one of the most sophisticated psychological moves a person can make. Marcus understood something that modern psychology has only recently confirmed. Most people who behave badly are doing so from a place of pain, ignorance, or fear, not from a desire to genuinely harm you. The person who humiliated you in a meeting is probably terrified of their own inadequacy. The person who road raged at you this morning is carrying 10 stresses you know nothing about. The colleague who stabs you in the back, somewhere beneath that behavior is a wound you can't see.
Marcus calls this the practice of seeing the common humanity in difficult people, not to excuse their behavior, not to allow it to continue unchallenged, but to stop making it personal. Because the moment you make someone's bad behavior about you, you hand them power over your peace. The Stoic move is to say, I see what you're doing. I understand where it probably comes from, and I refuse to let it disturb my character. That's not weakness. That's the most advanced form of strength there is. By now, you might be thinking, this all sounds incredible in theory, but how do you actually implement it? How do you turn these ideas from philosophy into lived practice? This is where Marcus Aurelius gets startlingly modern, because his approach was systematic, daily, ritual. Every single morning, before anything else, Marcus would sit and prepare his mind for the day, not just by planning tasks, but by rehearsing his inner life. His morning ritual, as reconstructed from the Meditations, involved 3 things. First, expect difficulty. He would mentally rehearse the kinds of people and events he would encounter that day, not to dread them, but to refuse to be surprised by them. The philosopher Epictetus, who deeply influenced Marcus, called this negative visualization. If you've already imagined the difficult conversation, the traffic, the ungrateful colleague, you arrive at them prepared, not ambushed. Second, set an intention. Marcus would remind himself of his values. What kind of man did he want to be today? Patient? Fair? Calm? He didn't leave his character up to circumstance. He decided it in advance. Third, review the Stoic principles. The dichotomy of control. The view from above. The common humanity of difficult people. He refreshed these ideas daily because he knew, and this is crucial, that knowing a philosophy and living a philosophy are completely different things. You forget. You drift. You need to come back. Think of it like going to the gym. You don't work out once and stay fit forever. The Stoics understood that emotional mastery is exactly the same. Daily practice, daily repetition, daily recommitment.
The morning ritual is where the work actually happens. They build what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to precisely identify what they're feeling and why, instead of just being swept away by a vague tide of emotion. Marcus knew something else, too. Something painfully human. He knew he would fail. He would lose his temper. He would say something sharp or unfair. He would let pride or frustration run ahead of wisdom. And his response to failure was not shame. It was simply, noted. Tomorrow, begin again. That is perhaps the most Stoic thing of all. If the morning ritual was where Marcus Aurelius set his intention, the evening review was where he held himself to account. And this practice, more than perhaps any other, is what distinguished Stoic philosophy from mere intellectual exercise. Every night, and this comes through clearly in the tone and structure of the meditations, Marcus would ask himself 3 questions. Did I lose my temper today? If yes, why? What triggered it, and what does that reveal about my assumptions and expectations? Did I act with integrity in every encounter, or were there moments where fear, pride, or ego moved me, rather than reason and virtue? What can I do better tomorrow? Not flogging himself, not spiraling into self-criticism, simply, and this is the Stoic way, honest, compassionate, unsentimental assessment. The Stoics called this the daily examen. It predates modern journaling, modern therapy, modern coaching by 2,000 years, and the research now backs it up completely. People who reflect deliberately on their emotional reactions at the end of each day show significantly better emotional regulation over time. They get less triggered by the same things. They recover faster. We've covered a lot of ground today. But before we close, I want to leave you with something that I think is genuinely important. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD. He never published his journal, he never gave a TED Talk, he never tried to build a personal brand or teach workshops on emotional intelligence. He wrote these words for himself, to remind himself, to hold himself to a standard he found difficult but non-negotiable. And here's what strikes me most about all of it. Marcus didn't think these ideas were special. He didn't think he had discovered something rare or extraordinary. He thought he was simply doing what any reasonable, responsible, self-respecting human being should do: take ownership of their inner life. He thought anger was, at its core, a failure of understanding, and he spent every single day trying to understand better. So here is the invitation. Not to become a philosopher, not to memorize the meditations, not to be perfect. The invitation is simply this: the next time something makes you angry, and it will, probably today, try to find the pause. Just the pause. Ask, what expectation of mine just wasn't met? Is this in my control? What would the view from above show me? You won't always succeed. Marcus didn't always succeed. But here's the thing about a practice. The trying is the point. Every time you pause instead of react, you are training your mind. Every time you choose understanding over fury, you are becoming harder to break. The Roman emperor who ruled millions knew the only kingdom worth ruling is the 6 inches between your ears. That kingdom is yours. The question is, who's on the throne? Thank you for watching.